Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, January 29th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 215 days. The game against Michigan in 306 days. We are not talking football today. We are talking basketball. Everyone, come in, sit down. We need to have a conversation about Chris Holtmann. Ohio State basketball is going nose down into the ground right now. They are on a 14-game road losing streak in the Big Ten. It is a mess right now. They just went to Northwestern on Saturday night and just got run out of the building by 25 points. Tony Gerdeman is here to have this extremely uplifting conversation with me. Tony, do you agree it is probably about time to have a conversation about Chris Holtmann in the direction of the Ohio State basketball program?
Well, we're here, aren't we? It's come to this point where now we are talking about it. And this is one of those games at some point, at one point in the second half, Ohio State had been outscored 33-10. And it felt like this was a culmination of just the last month or so. And I know we'll all point to the annual January slide or whatever, but there's been very little redeeming quality for this season, whereas other seasons have had some things. And, you had the win over Alabama earlier in the season and, glimpsing being ranked. But by now, in year whatever of Chris Holtmann's era, it feels like looking at the horizon and seeing the rankings is well short of where they should be right now.
Yeah, and if you're not following basketball particularly closely, Northwestern is not anything fantastic this year. They are 47th right now in the Ken Pom rankings. Here are Ohio State's Ken Pom rankings under Chris Holtmann. That first year where he came in and it looked like, holy smokes, this guy is a wizard. But they were 16th. Second year, took a step back. They were 44th. Third year, 8th. Fourth year, 11th. And then 31st, 49th. And now they are 61st to date this season. The trend, as they say, is not your friend in this case. I think the thing that is maybe most concerning to me, other than the sort of repetitive, almost predictive, these seasons all are starting to look the same, and that's not a good thing, is there's very clearly there's just not a lot of answers right now for Chris Holtmann. Because after the Nebraska game, he said, quote, "We weren't physical or tough enough. That is ultimately on me. We were too soft at times with the ball, soft with our cuts and soft defensively. We've got to get better in that area. That was clear. I think you saw it on the glass for sure." And then they went out against Northwestern, which again is not exactly an elite program, got out rebounded, lost by 25. After that, he said, quote, "We have to be better. Bottom line, we just have to be better across the board. All of us, players, coaches, we have to be better." He was asked whether this team can still improve. He said, quote, "Absolutely we can. We have to find a way. Bottom line, we have to find a way." Tony, that all seems rather short on specifics. That just seems like, well, maybe, if something changes, then something will change. That feels like someone sort of stumbling around a dark room looking for something and not having a lot of luck.
It sounds like some wishery. And you read those quotes and you're like, well, tell us something we don't know. We know you need to do better at this. We know you need to fix this. How do you do it? And right now, the how is not been presented and has not shown up on the court. And whether it's, they're drawing up clean looks for their jump shooters, the shots aren't falling, then you got to do something else because the shots have not been falling for a while with this team. So you've got to figure something else out, whether it's, better defense or being more careful with the ball, slowing things down, whatever it takes. Like, you've got to find a way to win. And more often than not over the past couple of years and this year as well, they're finding ways to lose, especially last year. You mentioned this road losing streak. The last road win was January 1st of 2023 at Northwestern. And then it seemed like Northwestern didn't want to have that repeated this time out and just put Ohio State in a blender. And they were doing this early on without their best scorer scoring. Like, they were doing this with their team. And right now, Ohio State's team is, you've got Bruce Thornton, who has been up and down, and Roddy Gale been up and down. Those two are the cornerstone of the program, but they're sophomores, and they were talented freshmen last year. And the youth, you understood last year there are going to be some struggles. As sophomores know now in college basketball, you can't really afford to just sophomores should be able to produce like juniors and seniors. That's just the way it is. Everything is sped up in college basketball, and sophomore, that might be the last year you get them. Heck, we've seen the last couple of years at Ohio State, freshman might be the last year you get them. So maybe the lack of development has also been a concern, where, you lose Malachi Branham as a true freshman, so you don't know what he would have become as a sophomore or junior if he would have been the same. And the concerning part is maybe he would have been the same because the development hasn't necessarily been there over the last few years either, individually and especially as a team. When you look at the record, the trajectory of things, and you see the double-digit losses every year, and they're just getting higher and higher. And I don't know if they'll reach the 19 losses from last year, but if they don't win anymore, they sure might.
Yeah, and the trend every year, it's a little spooky how similar these seasons are. A mutual acquaintance of ours, at B1G_Ryan, had a tweet from October 2022 where he just said, this is just the Chris Holtmann season, essentially. 1, leak poor scrimmage. 2, talked about team's youth. 3, beat expectations through New Year's Eve, earned media's admiration for, quote, overperforming. 4, collapse in January/February because of poor coaching, blame it on youth. 5, recover for March, rebuild expectations, get extension. 6, collapse again, first weekend exit. And it's like, that seems kind of mean, but also not, you can't really point at that and go, no, that's not correct. And that was posted October 24th, 2022. That's 2 seasons ago. And I think people are maybe getting to the point where they're not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe anymore with the basketball program, where it's like, well, look, they're 12-2, and Jeff Goodman is tweeting about where are the Chris Holtmann haters now, and then immediately they lose to Indiana, lose to Wisconsin, lose to a Michigan team that has not beaten anyone else, beat Penn State, lose at Nebraska, lose at Northwestern. They've got Illinois and Iowa and Indiana and Maryland and Wisconsin and Purdue, and coming up. I mean, this is not necessarily going to get better anytime soon. So then the question becomes, okay, is it time to make a change? And one of the big factors in that conversation is he was given a 3-year extension and a $500,000 raise in March of 2022. That was a year they were a 7 seed in the tournament. So I know you have to give contract extensions because you don't want to get to the point where you're coaching in the last year of your contract, because that'll kill recruiting. So I kind of you have to give some kind of extension. That is probably one that if Gene Smith had to do it all over again, he would probably not make that same decision. So under that extension, Chris Holtmann has 4 years left at $3.5 million. That totals $14 million left on that deal. Tony, that's a lot of money. And I feel like we're at the point where you've got the sunk cost fallacy working against opportunity cost, because the sunk cost fallacy is basically, well, we've put all this money into this. We've invested all of this money and time into this. We don't want to pull the ripcord yet, even when maybe this is not going to improve. And then the other problem is opportunity cost, because every dollar you spend on a Chris Holtmann buyout, you can't spend on something else. And there's plenty of other demands on athletic department funding and donor money right now. So I guess, what do you do here? Do you think Chris Holtmann looks at this and kind of goes, well, I don't really have an answer, and I don't, is there a path forward for Chris Holtmann at Ohio State?
Well, doesn't he have to provide an answer? I think that's the key there. When Gene Smith and Thad Matta had their discussion in June of a few years back, when Thad ultimately got fired, Thad really had no answers for Gene in terms of the future, the recruiting, things like that. And so if Gene Smith, who is still in charge until July 1st, so this is his call right now, if he sits down and talks to Chris Holtmann about it, and Chris Holtmann has no answers or doesn't have the right answers, then that kind of tells you it's time to move on. Now, do you want to take that expense? Because you look at the annual attendance figures, they're going down every year. So you're losing, and not that they're ever going to sell out consistently at Value City Arena. They never have, and they never will. Place is too big, and interest is lessened every year. That's all sports. That's all, live events. We can all just watch it at home, and even unless they put all of the games on Peacock, then maybe that will drive some people back to the arena. But you're leaving 4, 5, 6,000 empty seats in the arena every night, and I don't think it's going to get any better, especially if he continues to stay employed at Ohio State, and you just have this expectation. We've all seen it, so why would next year be different? Even if they start out 12-2 again, like that has been seen before. So, Thad Matta was let go after like one bad season, and they were still over 500. You're now into a second bad season, and not that Ohio State can still pull out of this somehow. If they win most of their games, they can still get to the tournament. But why do we expect that to happen based on what we've seen to this point? And then you also have to figure in the reports that when the Big Ten expands next year, only like 15 of the top of the 20 Big Ten, or the 6 to 18 Big Ten teams, are going to be making the Big Ten tournament. So there's also that to factor in as well. So, Thad Matta didn't get this much leeway with way more credit built up. So, obviously the money is big, but I'm with you. Like the lack of interest, does that ironically save Holtmann here?
It's an interesting question, because the lack of interest, I mean, the program is just kind of dead right now. I think this is the second show we've done on basketball this entire academic year, and I cannot recall any comments saying you guys should do more coverage of basketball. It's just the level of interest is just not there. To your point, even if if they go 12-2 next year, I think people are just going to kind of shrug and say, well, let's see what happens in January. The 12-2 build up during football season, basketball is kind of an afterthought anyway. I do wonder about the lack of interest in basketball, because everyone, I think if you polled Ohio State fans right now, a lot of them would say you probably need to make a change. If you poll Ohio State fans in, next November, when Ohio State's playing Michigan and, they have Caleb Downs on the field versus not having Caleb Downs on the field, like you would be glad you had Caleb Downs on the field if Michigan is driving for the tying touchdown, something like that. Well, there are resources involved in bringing your players back. There's resources, there's NIL deals, and that's not coming directly from the schools, but it's coming directly from the donors. And the money to make a change at the head basketball coach position is at least somewhat coming from the same donors. Now, maybe there's some big pocketed basketball only donor who doesn't care at all about football, and it's really two separate buckets of money. Maybe. But honestly, do Ohio State fans really care that much that they would prefer to have a change in basketball if that also comes at the expense of, not having as many resources for football? So yeah, it's possible that forces a change. It just, we would have to dive into the ticket revenue drop and all that kind of stuff. And how much would ticket revenue increase if you do bring in a new person? The other question is, you have seen coaches in the past take a negotiated buyout for less money than they're owed. Paul Chryst is a great example. He was the head coach of Wisconsin football, was a Wisconsin guy, Wisconsin lifer. He was owed $20 million by Wisconsin. He took an $11 million buyout. They sort of, it was kind of like, yeah, okay, I get it. I understand that you want to make a change. I understand the reason that you want to make a change, even if I don't totally agree with it. I don't need to take $20 million because I care about the program and all that kind of stuff. So you might, can you get it down to $8 million, something like that? I don't know if that's something that Holtmann's willing to do or not. If it does come to that kind of conversation, that's another piece of this conversation as well, though. So it just, what do you think happens? I mean, and the other factor, Tony, is you've got to change an athletic director coming up, and who is ultimately the one who's going to make this call? Is it Gene Smith who's heading out the door? Is it Ross Bjork who's coming in, but it doesn't start until July, but they start having conversations? Because one thing that really struck me at Ross Bjork's introductory press conference, Ryan Day was sitting there in the seats with us, right next to him, and talked about a bunch, and glowing reviews from Ross Bjork, and Chris Holtmann was like standing way over to the side of the room, 100 feet away, and there was like maybe sort of one indirect reference to basketball, and that was it. And it was kind of like, I don't know that Ross Bjork feels like he needs to make super good friends with Chris Holtmann, because I don't know that they're going to be coworkers for that long.
Well, and after this last game against Northwestern, I think I came to the belief that I wouldn't be shocked if Chris Holtmann didn't make it to the end of the season, because I'm not sure that you won't see more games like this. And then how many more games like this can you allow to happen before you do something? But then I go back to that same conversation that Gene Smith and Chris Holtmann will have, like, what are your answers? And if you don't have the answers, then, would you look like the bigger person if you did take a negotiated buyout, as opposed to, no, I want everything, even though I have not been able to fulfill my end of the bargain. And when we talked to Ross Bjork, he said the goals for all of the programs will be championships. And I tweeted out the other day that Ohio State basketball fans can't realistically think the national championship is a goal, because you've got one in over 60 years. But it's more than this. It's competing for the Big Ten. It's getting into the tournament, making some noise in the tournament, being a team that is known nationally for good things and instead of bad things. And right now, things just are not trending well. And in fact, they're trending worse and worse as you go on. So I would be pretty surprised if he is here for the length of his contract. And I would not be very surprised if that is done before March. And, I have no information on that, just the way things are going. And from what we have seen, where's the optimism?
Yeah. And while I don't think a national championship is necessarily a reasonable expectation for Ohio State, you have seen teams just get hot. You can win the national championship as a team that enters the tournament as the 25th best team in the country if you just get hot and win 6 games. So it's not like that's impossible, but that's also not a realistic. If you haven't done this since 1960, you've gotten close a couple times. If you haven't done it since 1960, obviously that's not a realistic expectation. That could be a hope, but it's not an expectation. Making the Final Four, that's not unrealistic. They've done that a bunch of times. 4 times since 1999, something like that. 5 times. That's realistic. This is Holtmann's 7th season. He's never reached the Sweet 16. That's a problem. You have to get to the second weekend, certainly. And if you lose in the Elite Eight, okay, that's fine. But you can't get to the Sweet 16 even as a 2 seed losing to Oral Roberts. Just, yeah, I'm with you. I think it needs to be a conversation about where do you go from here? How do you stop this slide? Because right now the plane is going into the side of the mountain. So you need to, while the basketball program is hearing terrain, pull up, what is the plan to pull up? Because the current trajectory is unsustainable. So we'll find out whether there is a plan and whether there is a change that's going to come during the season, after the season. A lot of different factors in there, financially, personnel, and much, much more. Boy, it is definitely a time for Ohio State basketball, that's for sure. Good news. At BuckeyeHuddle.com, we talk a lot more about football than we do about basketball. And the news on the football front has been much more positive recently. You can join us there to talk about that. If you want to talk about basketball, there are some threads on our board about basketball as well. Not a lot of answers there either. But you can let's focus on the football. Good times there. The men's tennis team having a successful run recently. The women's hockey team, number 1 in the nation. There's some good stuff going on at Ohio State. You can talk about it all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.